Hello, this is the Fiction Nonfiction Podcast from Literary Hub, where we believe that every issue in your Twitter feed or on the evening news has already been tackled somewhere in literature. I'm Whitney Terrell, the author of the novel The Good Lieutenant.
And I'm Ganeshananthan, also known as Sugi, author of the forthcoming novel Brotherless Night.
Is it really?
Is what really?
Your book, forthcoming. Like what pass are you on right now? How many editorial passes have you done?
I'm on the umpteenth pass. No, I actually have no idea exactly how many there were.
Are there a lot? I thought you could only have 3.
If you could only have 3, I've had them.
Okay.
I guess it depends on what you're counting as an editorial pass.
I'm counting on it's like they give you the first time you see it as copy, right? Now in a PDF, happened. It used to be printed out, and you get you're responding to copy edits then or whatever. Then you get it back, then you can do that once more, and then you get a third pass, which is the final time.
I only got one of the ones in copy.
Okay.
I think. I mean, with a copy editor.
But it's been, it's been longer ago than you would remember more directly what's happening.
Anyway, yeah, I think that we're jumping the gun. We're
talking about first or second or third pass proofs, and we haven't done a publishing industry episode in a while, so we thought that we would use the occasion of you finishing your book to do one. Most podcasts, including our own, talk about how books get written and sold or bought, but we wanted to spend an episode talking about what happens to a book once it has already been written and bought.
Yeah, I think a lot of that process is surprising and interesting, and sometimes a tiny bit stressful, just a tiny bit.
It's good stress.
Is there such a thing as good stress?
I think that finishing a book and then everything else that happens for me is like, it requires concentration and there's work, but it's a different kind of work than writing a novel. With a novel, there's so much that you don't know. Every morning you wake up, this is what I'm doing, because I'm actually, adding some edits to my book, which will hopefully be forthcoming soon enough. And you're asked to solve a problem that you don't have a solution for. And that solution you have to find is one that nobody else has used. And so that seems different than the stuff that happens post-publication. Sorry for the French dogs barking outside.
French dogs.
There's a lot of French dogs around here.
Everyone's in France this summer except for me. Anyway,
that's because you have a forthcoming book. You don't get to go to France if you have a forthcoming book. It's only the slouchers like me who go to France.
Whitney's crying a single tear for me. So there is, as we're alluding to, plenty of uncertainty to the publishing part also. And I'm finding that there's a ton of that. It's really a different ballgame now than it was the last time I had a book come out. And I do feel like at times I am trying to find solutions to a problem that no one else has used these solutions.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, fair enough. I mean, I remember the days of publishing, like going through the process of beginning that publishing a book. So we always do the guest bios on this show normally, but we never get to do our own bios. So we're going to introduce you. V.V. Ganeshananthan is the author of Love Marriage, which was long-listed for the Women's Prize and named one of the best books of the year by the Washington Post. Her work has appeared in Granta, the New York Times, and Plowshares, among others. A former vice president of the South Asian Journalists Association, she has also served on the board of the Asian American Writers Workshop. She is a member of the board of directors of the American Institute for Sri Lankan Studies and the Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop, a co-host of the Fiction Nonfiction podcast on Literary Hub, which I have heard of. She teaches in the MFA program at the University of Minnesota. How am I doing?
That is, good stuff. I now have a lot of I forgot about how you have to decide on a facial expression that you have while your bio is being read, which is like, it's like bio side eye, like I'm not here. Anyway,
that only happens in readings though, because on the video for this, it'll just be me talking. They won't see you. I don't think.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. You guys don't pay no attention to the Sugi behind the curtain. It better be accurate because I think that's actually, that's the bio from my book jacket, and the rest all goes into press materials.
Yeah. So, all right. Press materials. That's what let's start there. And before we do, I'm going to give listeners an outline for kind of how we're going to organize this talk. We're going to divide the quote unquote book preparation duties into 3 sections. 1, publicity / self-presentation, of which the bio is a part, 2, editorial, and 3, the physical book.
And yeah, that's fine. We can divide it into sections if you want. I know you like your groupings.
You put your
but-
glasses on in the middle of the video. What is going? That's not how that's supposed to. You're supposed to decide ahead of time what you're now. Now it's too late. I'm sorry. If you need them, wear them. You're fine. You look wonderful, but next time.
I couldn't.
Speaking of self-presentation.
Anyway, you can have your groupings if you want. You can. But I want to stipulate that none of these things, publicity, self-presentation, editorial, and the physical book, these are not happening in that order necessarily. Nothing is happening in order. Everything is happening everywhere all at once, or in overlapping waves.
Yeah, that's true. That is how that works, right? So there's not an order that's all happening at the same time. But I do think that once a book is purchased and turned in, before the copy edits arrive, there's a flurry of publicity work, including preparing your press materials, including an updated bio. So just for starters, what constitutes a good bio? How did you choose what you put into what I just read and what you left out? What are you trying to communicate in your bio?
It's funny that you asked this question because I come up with this bio. I think what happened was that I received a manuscript version of the book and it just had a bio in it. And I didn't remember having written one or come up with one. And so it's like, I don't object to this, but I also have no idea of its origins. So I wrote
somebody at your publishing house created a bio for you.
I think so. And it was a perfectly reasonable bio, but I was like, what is this attempting to communicate, and to whom is it? Like, what is its goal? Does it have a goal? And they were like, no, you can change it if you want to. We just, I think they just maybe dummied one up and put it in to save me time. And they were like, and then I presented some alternatives, mostly which were sort of the credential nature. And what you just heard a lot of was boards. I noticed been on a lot of boards.
Well, I'm assuming you're mentioning the Sri Lankan studies, American Institute for Sri Lankan Studies, because the novel is set in Sri Lanka, and that's like a way of credentialing.
That's true. And I think also maybe what this bio gestures to is a little bit of my involvement in social issues, in social justice and cultural organizations, et cetera, like my involvement in community. And so that was one way it was explained to me, like, this bio does this. And if you did a bio with awards or something, it would do something else. And, I liked the idea of presenting myself as someone who is involved in community. That felt accurate, hopefully accurate, hopefully interesting, and like sort of right. The discomfort of a bio is like that you have to enter into a kind of self-aggrandizement that I at least find like very squirmish. And you have to be like, I am, and I, if I wanted to do a lot of I am, I would probably write more essays, and I write some, but this is not that. This is not that. So like, there's something I admire the brief bio. I admire the one with the funny twist at the end. I think, there's so many different ways it can be done. It's a little bit like, what's a good resume, and I know a good resume when I see one, but there's so many acceptable formats and different ways to present yourself. But I think the question that I asked my editor was actually, it was helpful and clarifying for me to ask that, like, what is this trying to say about me? And the fact that I hadn't written it before I asked the question was also helpful. I think they were probably trying to help me get out of the squirmish bit.
Well, I think you always want to say, hey, what was my last book, and what have my books done that has been notable? I think people like to see that your work has appeared in prominent places. And you mentioned Granta and the New York Times. I mean, that's a way of saying like, hey, I'm a pro. I published in these places. I know when I was publishing The Good Lieutenant, like, because it was a war novel, I mentioned all of the war reporting that I did. And I wanted to make sure that was in there so that people knew, okay, well, that answers some questions about why he would be writing this book. So were there parts of that? I mean, that's what I think of when I'm looking at your bio. Were there parts that you added here that weren't in there before?
I think I swapped out a publication because I think that I straight out of college had worked at The Atlantic. And I felt like that credential it's accurate. It's also a little bit old. And so I swapped it out for something more recent. And
I don't mention that I worked at the New York Observer anymore because Jared Kushner, or whatever that guy's name is, runs it.
Right. I mean,
now.
there's the right. It's all selective also, right? I mean, you're putting things in, you're leaving things out. So I tried to, I mentioned places where both my fiction and my nonfiction had appeared. And I also just put in things I do that I really love. Like I really loved working at the Asian American Writers Workshop. That job meant a lot to me. Being on the podcast means a lot to me. So I definitely like that was not in the initial draft and I went and put it in. And the Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop. I mean, all of these ISLES, which is how we say the acronym for American Institute of Sri Lankan Studies. Like a lot of my colleagues involved in that organization were helpful with the book. And so it's also like a way of acknowledging them, I think.
Okay, the bio, though, is only a small piece of this. You also get assigned a publicist. You meet with that publicist, or at least I did, before the book comes out. Generally, the first thing that happens, or at least this happened for our Strauss and Giroux, is like, the publicist gives me a form, like asking me to fill out all the people that I know in publishing, people who might review or assign the book to be reviewed, who might blurb the book, who are homies and like would help me out in some way. Have you done that yet? Did you do that? Will you do that?
I did do that. I did it for Random House a while ago. It might have been last fall.
Okay.
And I have to do another one for Viking, which is publishing Brotherless Night in England. And yeah, it's I've lived a lot of places and I find this to be a pretty overwhelming task. And I sort of have to start reconciling myself immediately at the beginning. It's like, I'm going to forget someone or something. But then a thing that I did this time that I was actually really helpful and made me feel so much better was that because I'm like not only a physical, but also an electronic hoarder, I had my previous author questionnaire that I had sent to Random House for Love Marriage, and it is filled out so badly. Like it's just, I just did a terrible job. Like I had no sense of what would be useful at all. And I was struggling and scraping for anything that would be helpful. And I knew like, hardly
This is
anyone.
my aunt who lives in Wisconsin, a few blocks from a bookstore. Maybe she could be helpful.
I mean, it was really bad. And so I had that document and I read it and I was like, well, at least whatever I do will be better than that this time. So like looking at my own history of filling those out and realizing how much better equipped I was now made me feel less terrible as I did it. But yeah, it's another like, right. All of these things that you're doing in this time period feel like again, conscious self-aggrandizement, or like you're of course you're like spent all this time on your book and you're trying to promote it. And I at least am afflicted with, like, I think there's, for some people anyway, like no small amount of shame attached to promoting oneself. And what is that? I think like,
I don't say what I mean. Like, what is that? I don't mean that. I do think that I was brought up that you shouldn't promote yourself. Like that wasn't really the culture that I was brought up in. That seems similar to you. Yes. Although I found that less hard to get over for some reason.
I think that,
maybe because I didn't like the culture that I was brought up in. So I was like, all right, fuck this,
Yeah, I mean, I think like there's of course like all sorts of cultural and gender and I don't know, like, geography and all sorts of things going to that age. And I don't know what you feel deferential about and what you don't, and like why do you feel deferential, or like, and I don't know if you don't sort of take this chance to say, and I think I've also been lucky to, I took a really long time to write the book, but I also have had a lot of people, including you, like say like, I'm on your side. And that also in comparison to the previous round made me feel like I knew who also would be comfortable with me putting their name on that list, which made me feel like less gross about it.
There's a lot of people going to be very supportive of your book. I know that for a fact. So the most delicate, and this, when I was thinking about our earlier conversation about what was stressful about this is the thing that does stress me out and that I do feel extremely nervous about when it happens, is the blurb request, right? So I know you've done yours already because you told me that you did, but how did you make those requests? Why did you choose the people that you asked? Why didn't you ask me to give you a blurb? What is going on around here? What am I, chopped liver?
And this is the part tune into the video channel to watch me turn off my video in shame. And, I think like it is so delicate and weird. And I sometimes have, students will say to me, like, how does this happen? This weird transaction, which exists in the terrain between friendship and business, where like no one really wants to lurk in that swamp. And so, I think I provided this list of who I knew. And then I think that what happens, this is also somewhat mysterious to me, probably purposefully so, like, right, they go to sales and say, like, what are the goals here? And then, I expressed like my admiration for some people who I also like. There were people I knew, and then also just like people who I didn't know, but whose work I really admired. And then I think I also came to understand, as I did not understand, I think also the first time around, that like you can't actually ask everyone. Right. So the publishing house is also, they have a certain number of asks probably that they can have. And so they can't, I don't know, ask, Marilyn Robinson for everyone. They have to figure out where that would make the most sense, and whose work she's actually most likely to like and support. And that's like maybe not the best example, but so you shouldn't ask everyone you knew, because the other thing that can happen, and this has happened to me, and I understand that this happens, so it's also okay, but like sometimes you blurb a book and your blurb doesn't appear anywhere in the promotional material for the book, and that's also like, that's a little bit of a waste, right? Like you've taken that person's...
super bummed out about that. I'm sorry, I don't think that's cool.
I mean, I think that it's hard on everyone, because like the writer has...
I've never actually had that happen to me, so I'm not that's a new one.
I've had that happen to me at least once, and I think like, at that point, just someone somewhere has done some bad math, and I mean that both like on the level of how many blurbs can fit on the back of a book /
They're like, this
inside.
person's name is too long, we can't have a blurb on here.
That's really, like, I think that I'm also a person who has sometimes been quoted specifically to take up an extra line in a newspaper. So also a thing that has happened to me. So, right, like you have to be strategic about like who can you bear to have say no to you also. I mean, whose support would you love to have? Like, what are the Hail Marys you're going to throw? And you... All right.
So what was your biggest Hail Mary that worked? We're not going to talk about people who like said no to you. But
I guess like so some people have been asked and those haven't come back yet. Like there were a couple different rounds. There were a couple different rounds. There were a couple different rounds. So there was like an early set of folks who were very generous. And that included writers I knew and also writers I didn't know. So I think there were 4 early blurbers, Celeste Ng, Britt Bennett, Danielle Evans, and Sarah Novick. And Sarah Novick I have never met, and I know she's a friend of yours. And
yeah, I know. I mean, we did a conference together. We're an acquaintance, but yeah, she's great. She's a great person.
But and yeah, we talked about her work and that we both admired it, and I think you had mentioned it to me. And but I think that Random House actually came up with Sarah and as a suggestion. And then she like went out of her way to do that, and she'd never met me. And so that kind of generosity exists and like, happens all the time. And like, I have a variety of connections to Celeste and Britt and Danielle, who are also really wonderful, but also who I didn't want to assume how can you assume anyone's availability for anything, including, and especially like right now during a pandemic when like, God knows what is going on in someone's life. And so, I mean, I'm so hugely appreciative of their support for the book. And then there are also some like Hail Marys that are still out there where I was like, what is happening? And those are really exciting. And they were also just like a little bit funny, where I was like walking around the house being like, how does this, I was like, do you ask? Do I ask?
Well, did you write personal letters to the 4 people that you mentioned before? You know all of them. I assume you wrote them an email and said, would you blurb the book? Or did
I wrote to the 3 I knew.
Okay.
And
other than Sarah. Yeah.
Yeah. And my editor wrote to Sarah. And then there were people I didn't know who I wrote personal notes to, sort of about like, I really admire your work. And this is what my book is about. This is why I think and hope that you might like it. These are the things that in your work have buoyed me through the 18 years of working on this book. And like whether or not you're able to do this, I just like appreciate you. And to try to do that without sounding obsequious, which is a thing that like I personally I also don't want to sound obsequious, but there's also like, I don't know what sounds obsequious to different people, but like to sound,
if you like the person's work, you can be honest about liking their work.
Right.
It's not that hard.
And so that was in the end what I was like, it's okay, I can say things.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that was actually, I mean, in For Love Marriage, I didn't do that. That round did not happen. So this was like a totally new process to me to be sitting around writing. Yeah. And in some cases I was like, how do I even address this person? Dear sir, dear revered role model. Like, so, it was also, I mean, it was just, I was like, I'm in like a very absurd epistolary novel right now.
The one thing that is interesting to me about that is that I think blurbs do almost nothing to sell books. I think that they do help within the house, so that if a big, really positive blurb comes in, it goes out to the sales staff, it's shared with all the other editorial editors, everyone who's selling the book sees it, right? And says, oh, this person who is important and who we like has said this great thing about this book. This helps us feel good about selling the book. I don't know that readers buy books because of blurb, but I do think that it helps within the house, if that makes any sense.
I feel like it definitely helps within the house. I think that we have no way of knowing whether it helps with sales because there just like is no control group for that. Right. There's no way to kind of to separate that out. I don't know, like that actually would be a really interesting study that I would be fascinated to see. But I think clearly the sales folks think that they help. On the other hand, I know some kids were telling me about like, the blurbs on the back of Rick Riordan's books are fake blurbs from gods. Like the Percy Jackson books are like, right. So there's also, I don't know, there's a lot of work put into blurbs. I think this is the part where there's a great amount of effort for not as much return as the effort is, I think, on the blurbs. If everyone could declare a truce on blurbs and we would have no blurbs on books anywhere at all, ever in the industry, everyone would be better off. That's what I think. You were not my first friend to suggest that. I also think that will never happen.
I know it's not going to happen. It's like there's no such thing as unilateral disarmament. So everyone has to have the blurbs on the book to say that the book is good, so that a reader won't think, well, what's wrong with this book? It doesn't have any blurbs. I can only think of like one or two blurbs that have like significantly like sold a book. One of the ones that comes to mind is my friend Emily Barton, who Thomas Pynchon blurbed her first novel, and that was a huge deal. And I think it really did help with review coverage. It helped people pay attention to the book, and I thought it was really great thing for her and well deserved. There just aren't that many cases of that, though.
I think I mean, I probably overall, you're right. I mean, I can think of a few recently that I've seen, like what Jonathan Escoffery had got an extraordinary blurb from Anne Patchett that I was thrilled to see. But yeah, I can count on one hand, like the number that I can remember. And
still haven't answered why you didn't get that Whitney Terrell blurb, which is one of the few blurbs that actually will sell books in this world in the Kansas City, Missouri area.
I think that the way that this works, like
I'm giving you shit because that we know why. There's a real reason, and I think it's worth discussing. Like, okay, this would be the wrong person to have blurb the book. I am not the right person to blurb your book.
Right. Well, I mean, like, so we're known associates.
Yeah.
And like
it's like, what's he gonna say? Like we already have a pre-existing relationship, and also we're going to be talking about this book on the podcast, so I don't see why it would help for me to be on the back of your book. Also, right. What the fuck do I know about Sri Lanka? I'm not the right person to ask for a blurb about Sri Lanka, a Sri Lankan novel.
Well, I mean, like, this is an interesting thing, right? Because also, what does it mean? And this didn't happen for Brotherless Night, but like, what does the group of writers that we just mentioned, they have no particular expertise on Sri Lanka either.
That's true.
Right. And so
you asked Sarah because she wrote her novels about war, in a sort of civil war type thing that happened in her home country.
Yeah, I mean, like, again, so Random House picked Sarah, and I thought it was a good pick. But they did not explain it. They didn't explain it to me that way. They actually didn't explain it at all. I think we sort of like, they said her the name and I kind of was like, oh, of course, that's really smart. But I'm sure they had multiple reasons for it also. So yeah, I mean, I'm also glad to have the support of it as a general literary work, because I think that it's very easy for work by writers from any kind of marginalized background in particular to get sort of pegged to being, for people to forget to talk about the art. I at some point had coined some sort of portmanteau about this that involved aesthetic and ethnic, and I can't possibly say it now under pressure. But just like, I don't know, my ethnicity is like not an actual, there, I took my glasses off and put them back on because I remembered.
Okay.
And, yeah, I'm glad to have like the support of folks who are not quote unquote like specialists. Yeah, I don't know, like, it's a mystery, blurbs. And it's delightful when they work out, and obscurely, vaguely stressful when they don't, because you don't know what effect it's having. But
I'm just going to
that's
say
so,
they do make me jubilantly happy when they come in from somebody that you really like, and that is quite positive, and that is a good feeling about the book. It's your sort of like your first editorial review. Okay, we're going to move on to my favorite part, which is editorial. I love going over copy. I love thinking about continuity edits.
You're such a nerd.
You don't like it?
No, I love it. I'm also a nerd. I'm just
all right. Can you describe in specific terms what that process has looked like for you?
Yeah, I think so. We talked about this a little bit before. So there was, Caitlin did some line edits, Caitlin McKenna, who's my editor, and we did fold some parts of the process into each other. So normally there would be a read that was just the copy editor, at least that's my understanding, and a read that was just Caitlin before that. And in my case, for a variety of reasons that I think we're going to talk about a little bit later, like that read was layered on top of, those reads were layered on top of each other. So there was a version of the manuscript where the copy editor and Caitlin were both editing it.
Oh, that sounds a little complicated.
Yeah, and there were.
Wait, I just want to slow down. Like, so, my first book came out in 2001, and that book was edited entirely in colored pencils, right, by hand. That so was the book that came out in 2005, and then my last book, which came out in 2015, I think it was, like, that was all track changes. We sort of got away from. So are you doing this entirely on the computer, or is there a manual part?
It's entirely on the computer. That's a great question, because yeah, I mean, Love Marriage did also involve like a lot of colored pencil. I mean, I remember piling up the manuscript. I back then worked in bed, and I would just have like the manuscript strewn kind of all over the place, and then being like, I can't lose this or misplace this or have it out of order, and I need to be able to read my own handwriting. And the fact that only a single copy of it existed, I found that there was no way to back it up, I found very stressful.
Right. So tell me if this was the same for you. You would get actual line edits in red pencil. And then I worked in a green pencil to distinguish from that. And I would like say, I would just leave it if I wanted to keep the edit, or I would have to physically circle it and say like stet, or I want it this way, or I'd have to add a page like, no, see added, copy. And then I would actually type up the sentence the way I wanted it and like put it into the manuscript in the next page.
Yeah, what I remember is something like that. I don't remember, I don't know the exact colors of the pencils, but yeah, there was everything was being done by hand. Those insertions, those the arguments of like, you put a comma in, I'm going to take it out. You put it in, I'm going to take it out. All of the moments when the copy editor is asking very reasonable questions and you're discovering that you have a continuity error or like a grammatical inconsistency that they have just explained to you, that is revealed to you, years of your prose style and problems. That was all.
I found a continuity edit in The Good Lieutenant that wasn't clear to me until I was making edits for the French edition. The French found it out. They were like, hey, look, what about this? And I was like, I don't know. Do we really have to explain that?
Continuity edits, they're so fun. So I will say, yeah, in the last version, the last set of proofs, which was relatively recent, I read the book aloud. And that took forever and was really helpful. And I found many continuity edits and also many prose ticks. And I was like, should have done that one before. And normally I think I would have, but again, like the pandemic and various other circumstances.
Well, the nice thing about the reason that I find this part soothing is because you've accepted the plot is the plot. What's happened is happening, right? Well, you're making a face. And I'm beginning to realize that when I was publishing The King of Kings County, I was on this really tight schedule. And so I turned the book in August and it had to be done by October. They're like, we're putting this out next year. And I rewrote a significant portion of that book between like first and second pass edits, and I was adding like chapters, did you do that?
No, I
Okay.
did not do that in the proofs. With one exception, which my editor and I had discussed, that there was like a large desire in-house actually for a specific emotional beat to be hit. And I had kind of wanted to do that, but hadn't figured out how to do it. And they were like, please do it. Please do it. You can still do it. And so I did that in the last pass, or pretty close to it. But other than that, it was like very much sentence level edits. That last proofs file has 452 comments in it. But I don't know. The book is in British English. So I also did things like search for IZE and then replaced it with ISE and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm a plot changer. I'm a plot changer until pretty late in the game. But I didn't do it in the proofs very much.
I have done that. I do that almost except for my first book, I do that. It's a very bad, sometimes there's a scene that needs to be added that I won't be able to discuss till you have the sort of calmness of the proofs, like, okay, the major storm is over. I can really sort of consider this. And I'm like, that feeling when you're like, God, I'm going to do this. They're going to be so mad, but I'm going to do it anyway. And then you add something to the proofs.
There was something about the proofs where, I also was like, how much does the flow matter here? Am I trying to like make changes that fill the same number of lines? Like, how does it matter? And Caitlin was like, just do what's best for the book. And, if you get charged a certain amount of money, if there's like reflow issues, but you would have to do something, as far as I can tell, pretty excessive. Like I turned in 452 comments, some of which are commas and British English or continuity corrections, right? And no one's going to begrudge me, as far as I can tell, like a continuity correction, right? That would be about like suddenly adding like gratuitous paragraphs because I feel like it, and not because the book itself requires it. So I found them to be really supportive of the changes, and also, given again, like pandemic and other circumstances, like really accommodating of, I would say like what happened? There were like so many things that happened where I would be like, so I have this issue, or like I got sick, or there's massive political things happening in my city. Like, would you mind giving me like a moment? And they were always really nice about it.
So one of the complications for this editing process, which we're saying involves a lot of typing on keys, and even if it involved handwriting, would be a problem for you because you've been working with a disability since early April 2021, and your hands are injured. So how are you doing this editorial work?
Yeah, that's right. So, and I had hand problems off and on before that, but the ones since April 2021 have been continuous. I counted them the other day just because I was like, what happened? And there were like 9 different injuries, all of which are related and some of which are like compensating for each other. But maybe the shortest versions are to say that I have bone spurs at both of my wrists, which are from basically overuse that's connected to the pandemic. And so I go to a lot of PT and have like an ergonomic setup and things like that. But really the thing that helps is not typing. And so I don't type in different ways. I use Google Documents speech recognition. I use the speech recognition that is built into Macintosh computers. I use the speech recognition in Microsoft Word. I use voice memos. And then I have a couple of student workers who are scribes for me, who are supported by both my department and the Disability Resources Center here at the University of Minnesota. And so a lot of the time what was happening was that I was composing, and either people in my life, like my friends before these student workers were hired, and then later the student workers were editing stuff or typing for me. And so I would dictate. And so when I said that I had done that final pass reading aloud, I wasn't reading aloud to myself. I was actually reading aloud to one of my two scribes. And then after I started doing that, both of my scribes are remarkable, but the scribe who worked with me on the final pass of the book, after a certain period of time, I realized that it was to my benefit to stick with one scribe for that pass, because they were also accumulating all of the continuity in their brain. And so like, I was able to not just like, and they were really generous about it also. Like I could say like, do you understand this? Like, do you remember this? Did I repeat this phrase? I did repeat this phrase. Did you notice it? Do you remember this small detail from earlier in the plot? Do you understand
Did they
the
ever
politics?
say, I prefer not to?
They didn't.
That's the only scribe character that I know from literature, is that's what Bartleby would say.
No, fortunately, they're very not Bartleby. They're both really wonderful, and the scribe who worked on the final pass really helped me to catch a lot of continuity errors. And so I think like now, even if or when my hands are better, I think I would follow that process again. It was really, really precise, and I think it helped me a lot.
All right, we've now arrived at the preparation of the physical book, which, as we said at the beginning, has been going on concurrently during all these other things that are happening. But the fun part, this is fun. When did you get your cover images, and what did they look like?
When did I start getting cover images? I think I started getting cover images a while ago, and there were different rounds, like ones that had strong elements but didn't quite strike. And I think that there were a lot that I didn't see that maybe Caitlin just saw. And the designer, Donna Chang, who's completely wonderful, like did a lot of, just was really thoughtful and did a lot of research. And Caitlin also asked a lot of smart questions, sometimes was asking smart questions that like hadn't occurred to me. You know, what is the symbolic meaning of this image in a Sri Lankan political context, for example? And yeah, so there were a few different rounds, and then it kind of narrowed down to 2 images. And then there were a bunch of conversations at my agency and also in-house, you know, which of these 2 images did people prefer? And then there was a really strong preference for one, and the people who preferred that one kind of made their pitch for it. And I liked both of them actually. And I kind of pulled my friends and, you know, or just if I happened to be in conversation with another writer, I would.
Wait,
and
can you describe the 2 of them?
Yeah. And so like, right. And this is all very tender and weird to ask for other people's opinions about this, because if they say they don't like one and you end up with that one, like you have to be able to move forward in conversation with that person. Like you don't want to like every time you see that person be like, they hate the cover of my book. Right. And so one of the images, it was, so there was a first set of images that were like kind of landscape oriented. And I think that was in part because I had admired some landscape-ish covers and had cited them. I know I was asked for images that I found inspiring or that I was drawn to as I was working. So I sent in a bunch of images. And I said, I don't necessarily have rights to all of these. Some of these are images I took, like here are artists that I like, here are images of Sri Lanka that I find powerful. Like, and they made useful suggestions, like think of specific scenes. Like, is there a specific scene that you wish was on the cover of the book and depicted in some way? And eventually I realized that there are a lot of people on bicycles in the book, and a person riding a bicycle is an image that I associate with Jaffna, the city in Sri Lanka where most of the book is set. And so I think that, I mean, I haven't talked to Donna Chang directly about this, but I think that there was some hunting. You know, I was asked to hunt for pictures of people on bicycles. I think presumably they were looking for pictures of people on bicycles, and they found one. And it's really terrific. The photographer's name is Jeremy, I want to say Surdick, but maybe I will swiftly look that up. And I wasn't familiar with his work, so the designer found that. And like that, he had been to Sri Lanka. He had, you know, he had done reporting there. His name is Jeremy Suyker. I think it's Suyker, if anyone wants to look up his work. And so it's important to me that the image actually be of Sri Lanka and not somewhere else. And no one ever debated that with me, which was great, because sometimes people will just presume that it's okay to swap something in that is more dominant, kind of in other people's imaginations. But this, it felt like really respected my imagination while also giving the designer freedom to express. So actually I have an advance uncorrected proof. So I will I will incentivize tuning into our YouTube channel where I'm holding up.
Very nice.
Yeah. So there is a woman on a bicycle in front of a building in Jaffna, and the building has suffered some damage, and the dominant colors are kind of red and yellow, and the lettering on the cover is yellow, and then there are blurbs. And yeah, so, and then I think like I will go through this whole process again for the British edition. And those tend to be, the British covers are really different. So that'll be, I suspect, like a very different conversation too, which will be cool to see how they're varied.
All right. So the last thing we want to have you do is, we're not gonna have you read from the book. We'll when the book comes out, we'll talk about that aspect of it. But I often have students write jacket copy for like whatever thesis they're working on, or if they're writing a novel, or if they're a collection of short stories. Like, how would you? I think that it's hard when you're first starting as a writer to imagine how you would present yourself to the marketplace. Let's put it that way. And abstract what your book is about, because of course my book is about everything. It encompasses all worlds, and why would I want to limit it by saying what it's about, and that's sort of what I think. You start at that position and then realize, well, you have to limit it to make it mean anything. So and I think students are often surprised that, at least in my case, I think 2 out of 3 times of the novels I've written the jacket copy. Did you write your jacket copy, or did you have editorial say in it? And then would you read it for us?
Sure. I did have say in it. I don't honestly remember if I wrote the first version of it. I think it might have been a collab. Definitely, my editor and I, and the assistant editor working with her, all 3 of us definitely worked on it and debated the specific phrasing of it. And yeah, so I think, yeah, I definitely had a lot of say in it. And, and I think if there had been any part of it that I was specifically uncomfortable with, that it would not have flown, which I really appreciated because of the specifics of the politics. So, yeah, the jacket copy for Brotherless Night, which, just for the record, I imagine all jacket copy read in the voice of that dude who does all of the movie trailers, like, Land Before Time, and so if I could do that voice, I would be doing it now. Right. About Brotherless Night. A courageous young woman tries to protect her dream of becoming a doctor as civil war devastates Sri Lanka in this searing novel. Jaffna, 1981. 16-year-old Sashi wants to become a doctor, but over the next decade, as a vicious civil war subsumes Sri Lanka, her dream takes a different path as she watches those around her, including her 4 beloved brothers, get swept up in violent political ideologies and their consequences. She must ask herself, is it possible for anyone to move through life without doing harm? Sashi begins working as a medic at a field hospital for the militant Tamil Tigers, who, following years of state discrimination and violence, are fighting for a separate homeland for Sri Lanka's Tamil minority. But after the Tigers murder one of her teachers and the arrival of Indian peacekeepers brings further atrocities, she turns to another one of her professors, a feminist and dissident who invites Sashi to join her in a dangerous secret project of documenting human rights violations as a mode of civil resistance. Set during the early years of Sri Lanka's 30-year civil war and based on 16 years of research, Brotherless Night is a heartrending portrait of one woman's moral journey and a testament to both the enduring impact of war and the bonds of home. That's it.
Oh, that was good. I think it's really interesting when you talk about the one of the things that's hard for students and was hard for me, and you talk about we were talking earlier about like not wanting to to like say great things, like say, this is an amazing, terrific, wonderful novel, like you have to, but when you write the copy, you got to say searing, or you must say, you have to be able to say that this is good, or that this is powerful, or that this is, the war is vicious. You have to use strong language at certain points to signal things that you're trying to say about the book. I mean, I think you're using the word searing and the vicious civil war. I think it was that, you want to say, look, this is a book that's, it's not a comedy.
No,
I mean, I think you're trying to get that across, right?
Definitely not. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think there was a moment where I was like, I've always wanted to be called this. Could I be called this? And I leaned into the silliness of asking the question, and they were like, you can be called that. And I was like, cool. Good. I don't even remember which of these adjectives it was, but yeah, I mean, it feels a little bit like the prose version of giving that blue steel look from Zoolander. But
that is totally true. That is so funny. That is very good.
But yeah, anyway, so I'm working on my blue steel look, but
okay. You took your glasses off to give it. I see. That's very nice. All right. Well, Sugi, what are your expectations here? It's been a while since you published your last book. I like it that you said that you were doing research during some of that time. Based on 16 years of research. I love it. It's a way of flipping the tie. That took me a long time to write this book, but based on those 16 years of research, I did the same thing with The Good Lieutenant, which took me a very long time. So I'm super sympathetic. What do you hope is going to happen?
I mean, right. Like it's, again, this is like a little bit of a
win the Pulitzer Prize, Reese Witherspoon Book Club. Anything else?
Again, the movie trailer voice, with an unprecedented level of awesome, Brotherless Night rises to, right? Like, I mean, I think that one thing to do is like try to figure out how to turn the dial down a little. And it's hard because how can you, like, that dial is so far inside yourself. You gotta it's like, of course I have to reference this movie, but it's like that part in Temple of Doom where they just stick their hand right into your chest and like rip out your heart, right? And you gotta be like, no, keep it in there. Like, okay, just like keep your heart for other things. Like I think Sam Chang wrote that terrific essay about protecting your inner life. And several people have spoken wisely about how like your publication life and your writing life don't have to be the same. So I think I'll like mutter that to myself a lot and hope that I can like keep my writing life my own. But like that takes a lot of emotional discipline, and I think like I'll have to work on it. Like you have to work on everything else. But I think like the routes by which one does that are like certainly less clear to me. But I think like the news itself has become so unpredictable, right? And like you've talked on this show about how news has affected like publication for you, right? Like events in the world, like September 11th.
Oh yeah.
Right. Like, I mean, anything can happen. Anything can happen. Like I have friends who spent as long as this writing their books, and then they came out during the pandemic, and maybe that certainly was not what they imagined. So I hope that it finds
catching a break there.
I mean, exactly. I mean, I think that, yeah, I guess all books for the foreseeable future coming out during the pandemic. I think like this isn't, I'm sure that it will not go as I expect. So I'm going to try to expect very little. And like hope that it finds that I get to have good conversations with readers. And that it finds people who understand it.
Well, I think it's an excellent, searing, incredibly well-crafted masterpiece novel. There's my blurb. But I've read it. I think it's fantastic, and I think it'll do extremely well. And thank you for joining me on the Fiction Nonfiction podcast, which you co-founded. And listeners, we encourage you to begin preparing to pre-order Brotherless Night, which will be out in January of 2023.
You can pre-order it now.
Okay, there you go. There'll be links there. Pre-order it now.
Well,
am I in the acknowledgements? Or are you going to also screw me there?
Thank you so much for interviewing me. I'm not going to address that question at this time.
Oh.
Tune in next time.
All right.
But yeah,
I did just get an email from a friend who said, I've just gone over my proofs, and there was a couple mistakes, and one of them was in your name in the acknowledgements. I was like, okay, fantastic. At least it's there.
I will double check the spelling of all proper names.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks for the interview. Talk to you next time, listeners.